Okay, so we are live streaming right now. Let's start the other recording on cloud. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing the ayat, the tafsir for the ayat. And certainly yesterday we did talk about the different things that relate to the previous ayat. Let's look into some of them. Number one, we talked about سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, and we talked about the implication of going against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how that results in a sukht. A sukht is basically when the person is living a life away from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And وَفِي الْعَذَابِ هُمْ خَالِدُونَ, and they would be basically deemed, or they would be in that situation, and as a result of the choices that they had made, they would basically be left to living al-adhab, living to the torments, whether that's the torments of hellfire or whether it's a punishment in this dunya, because it said khalidun. So we're looking at basically, we went in the details, we're looking at their life as a result of two things. So we went in, I guess we don't see it here. Remember, we said natural order, and we talked about the legislating order. Here we go, natural order and the legislating order. We went in details with that. And we said that the legislating order is basically the orders from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a free will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wanting us to be obedient to Him in order to take us to the natural order. The natural order is basically the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or al-mashi'a al-kawniyya, is the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created this world. There's la mafar, there's no running away from it. It is not within our will to change it. Therefore, we could see that we have no choice but to succumb to that will, but to succumb to that natural order will, or natural order mashi'a kawniyya. The area that we have the will in is basically the area of what is called a taklif. What is called a taklif. So the area that we have will in, that is the area of taklif, meaning the area of testing, the area that will be tested in. And basically that's the area that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold us accountable for. And that's the area where you will find the obligation, you will find the haram, you will find the makruh, you will find the mubah, etc. That's the area of that legislating order. And we were basically given the different tools in order to be able to do and basically go for the legislating order, which basically is the area of taklif, or manat taklif. The area of taklif, you wouldn't be a person that is responsible, accountable for the legislating order, unless you had you had the mental ability, and unless you had perhaps the physical ability for that particular test. Okay, if a disability and a physical disability does not necessarily exclude the person from from all responsibilities, but it may probably not be obligatory on certain people, because let's say there's a disability. Let's give an example. Let's say somebody is not capable of doing sujood. Then in that situation, that disability does not hold them accountable. And plus, this isn't, let's say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishing them for not being able to do sujood because perhaps they've got back problems, knee problems, whatever it is. That would not be considered of a punishment. So this is in contrast, that would actually be considered as that would be considered as that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically giving them a hardship. But this hardship, if they're able to go past it, they're able to go beyond it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them the reward for as far and as much as they could do. But if they're not capable of doing anything, then in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them the reward based on the intention. All right, keep that one in mind. This is a very common question people would get. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them the reward based on the intention and not necessarily that they're not capable of doing it, that's a punishment. No. The third thing, if a person, so إن الله تجاوز لي عن أمتي الخطأ والنسيان وما استكرهوا عليه. The Prophet ﷺ had said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had dismissed three things on the ummah. Al-khata, what they would do, and perhaps by mistake, in other words, they didn't have the intention to do it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not hold them accountable for it. An-nisyan, forgetting something, وَمَا اسْتُكْرِهُ عَلَيْهِ, and what they were coerced to do. So something that is beyond your ability, beyond your will, beyond your own intention, then in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not hold you accountable for it. So this is legislating order, natural order. We're just right here doing a quick review before we would move on, inshallah. لتجدن أشد الناس عداوة للذين آمنوا اليهود والذين أشركوا ولتجدن أقربهم مودة للذين آمنوا الذين قالوا إنا نصارى ذلك بأن منهم قسيسين ورهبانا وأنهم لا يستكبرون. So let's see right there. لتجدن in لغة عربية, of course, the root is wajada. The root is wajada. How did wajada become ta and ja, and how did it become in this form? So let's just break it up right here. In Lugha Arabiya, whenever you would have this lam and followed by a noon, لآكلن لأشربن لأضربن لأقرأن لتجدن this form, this root, this wazn, basically this let's call it the wazn is kind of like you're making like a harmony. Then in that situation, this lam followed with this noon together at the end of the verb is actually called al-qasam. It's a form of qasam. It's a form of making an oath, meaning it is affirming something. أشد الناس عداوة, the most people that would have the highest level of hate or highest level of animosity towards the believers are basically al-Yahud. But we would know, for example, does that mean that it's all the Yahud, or could it be specifically certain groups of Yahud? So this would be just telling us that most of the Yahud would basically take the Muslims as their enemies. Is it possible that we can have certain Jewish groups that are not enemies to perhaps the Muslims? It is possible to find that. Rarely, though. Just keep in mind that it is possible. What is al-adawa? Al-adawa, the opposite of it is الصداقة أو المودة. So here's the opposite. You could see that the Quran is always using, this is called التضاد. What is التضاد? It's showing contrast. Let me write down the word. So التضاد actually means, kind of like an antonym. So this is, an antonym. So this is basically the contrast, or the different, the opposites, the different sides to a story, or the different sides to something. And this is very common in the Quran, where it would say, okay, if I'm going to tell you one side is an enemy, I'm going to also emphasize the other side that's not an enemy. If I'm going to tell you what hellfire looks like, I'm going to also tell you what Jannah looks like. If I'm going to tell you what leads to for perhaps fisq, I'm going to also tell you what leads to Iman. So this is very common in the Quran, to give the people the opposites, to see the contrast of what these different paths would look like. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَتَجِدَنَّ أَقْرَبَهُمْ مَوَدَّةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Oh, sorry, I didn't say عداوة. So العداوة, the root is عداء or عادية. عادية is the root, which actually means to cross boundaries. So when you see عداوة, that would basically be masdar, that would basically be kind of like an adjective, and it would it would basically be that the person is continuously crossing boundaries, because adiya would be to cross the limit, to cross a border, to cross a boundary, etc. And in that situation, il-adawa would be a person that's continuously and consistently crossing the border. And of course, what's going to be the motive behind that? Well, it's going to be an animosity within. So that's why we translated the word adawa to meaning animosity or hatred, which basically you would see in the other ayah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about Bani Israel. Let's go to that ayah and just see. We're just right there, 82. We're just gonna, did we actually, um, let's look into that ayah where we saw the two words actually come in the same ayah. Here we go. So you would see, here's وَأَلْقَيْنَا بَيْنَهُمُ الْعَدَاوَةَ وَالْبَغْضَاءَ. The difference between al-adawa and al-baghdha. Al-adawa would be an enemy to one another, meaning crossing boundaries from one another. Al-baghdha would be hatred, would be each one is concealing a feeling of, I guess, an evil will, and a feeling of wanting to seize the moment to probably cause harm. So this is al-Baghdad. Okay. And you could see that for al-Yahud, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned often in the Quran, and you could see in just these ayat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala associated الطغيان, crossing the limit. We is associated kufr, associated animosity, associated hate, associated war, associated corruption with the Yahud. And you could see right there that, hey, something is actually talking to us, and especially that we're living right now, October 24, 2024, a whole year and a couple days after October 7, and we're seeing how the Yahud, of course, resembling in Israel, how they're definitely crossing the borders, the boundaries of human rights, the boundaries of any international law, the borders of any peace treaty, anything of that we might agree with them. You could see that this is. But is this all the Yahud? Are all Yahud necessarily Israeli? The answer is no, not all Yahud are necessarily Israeli. I was listening yesterday to a lecture to Ilan Pepe, yesterday, and just an idea. When, of course, we would see, for example, Ilan Pepe, even though he himself is actually Israeli, an Israeli citizen, but he was talking about, maybe I could show you the lecture that I was listening to. He was talking about how he was a professor that, a historian, and how because he was talking about the history of Israel, wanting to emphasize what that meant in the history of Israel. He was basically removed from academia. Now, so this is the lecture that, or the podcast that I was listening to yesterday. He was talking about how he was banned from academia. He was banned from the University of Haifa, and he was boycotted basically because he wanted further scrutiny on 1948 and what really happened. And he was definitely encouraging his students to do further scrutiny. He was talking about how one of the books, it was basically published, and or some Jewish billionaire bought that publishing company just so that his book would not get published. And he was willing, of course, that Israeli billionaire was willing to buy the whole, or the whole publishing company, just so that his book would not be circulated around and would not basically get into reaching the masses. And you could see that it's silencing even those that would want to speak the word of truth. So it wasn't just him. There's also that chemistry professor. I forgot what his name was. I think his name was Ishaq Israel. No, I forgot what his name was. But other Jews, Noam Chomsky, to name, I guess perhaps one of those that stood against Israel. and stood strong against Israel. So it wasn't just, and we've got a number of different figures and academics that, although Israeli, although Jews, but felt that it was against Judaism, against the principles of Judaism to actually act in that brutal way against a nation that is basically a peaceful nation. So this is just to name a few. So how about this generalization right there in the ayah? So a generalization would not mean that every single person. A generalization would basically say that the common thing in general, the majority, etc. And we would say, of course, the majority of the Jews would basically support Israel and not necessarily go against Israel. So this would basically be exclusive to those that support Israel and not necessarily those that are anti-Israel. You've got a lot of Hasidic Jews, a lot of um, Notori Karta, well, they're Hasidic as well, but Orthodox Jews and perhaps even other Jews. I actually met in Palestine a couple, and I said the story of the story when I was in on a bus in Agad bus on Agad bus and how the that Yemeni Jews was defending me. It wasn't just him. I have many, similar stories, but of course, on the other hand, you would also see, I remember one time I was in Givat Ram, basically at the Hebrew University. The Hebrew University has different locations. One of those locations is basically a location that is in Givat Ram, which basically right next to the Knesset. And I wanted to pray my Asr, I believe it was. So I go underneath kind of like a stair area and just pray there. So a lady just runs towards me and starts yelling at me, "What are you doing there?" And I just said, I'm just mitbalel, which basically means I'm praying, but she was extremely angry and wanted to attack me. But you can just imagine when you're in an area that's predominantly Jewish, if you were to attack right away, even if you're attacked, and if you were to retaliate or attack back, you're right on the spot. You're going to be, I guess, their narrative is that I attacked, not that I was being attacked. So this is just an idea of how certain of course, certain people, of course, might just on the spot just want to assume that you are just a terrorist or etc. Same thing. I was at the bus station and I was just really wanting to go from bus I believe it was 27 if I remember correctly to bus 28 and I was just walking down the bus station right on the spot. I don't know where they came from, just storming from every single direction. I had almost 12 people all of a sudden surround me from every single direction and just asking me questions where they would not even give me enough time to answer. What are you doing here? What are you studying? I didn't even have enough time. Opened up my bag, started searching, body searching me right there, just with a split of a second right there. And I didn't even have the time to do anything, to answer any question, to do anything. Split of a second. Just it was almost 12 people just surrounding me, and the guns are on my head. Literally, the guns are pointed at me from every single direction. So I just froze. I literally just froze because any second, any movement that you might do is going to be basically interpreted that you tried to reach out to a gun or a grenade or who knows what, and they would give themselves the justification to just shoot on the spot and just assassinate you right there. So you could see right there that adawa, and they could just easily give themselves the justification, put a knife next to my hand after being killed, and they would say, "Oh, she tried to reach out to a knife." So yes, this is something that that adawa, um, um, that animosity that you would have. At the same time, I must admit, There were some conversations that I managed to hold with certain IDF or Israeli, I guess, occupation force, IOF. And there were times that I came across some of those soldiers that said, well, I don't believe in what I'm doing, but I'm just here because it's mandatory at this age for me to do a 2-year service in order to get, I guess, the different privileges, whether university, whether it's, I guess, taxes and stay and documentation and all of that, or else I'll get prisoned. So you could see that some of them don't necessarily believe in all of that that's going on, and subhanallah, manage to make out of their own people, even those that don't believe in this. They're afraid to even go outside the service, afraid to even stand against just like Ellen Pepe, and this is just, just a personal, I guess, just a personal conversation with some of the Israelis. And I lived in Palestine for 14 years total, but in the Jerusalem area, which basically gave me access to visiting the areas that are predominantly Jewish or controlled, or at least basically had what is called or considered at the time was an Israeli Hawiya. Let me maybe show you that Hawiya right there, and I'll show you what that looks like. Let's see if, let me see if I can, let's see. I'm just going to write it in Arabic, see if I can, you let's see. I'm going to write it in Arabi then. Hawiya Israeliya. Let's write it. Okay, here we go. This is what it looks like. So we would have something, okay, back then, this is what it looked like. So we would have this documentation, and this documentation it's a blue documentation. For the people that are living in the West Bank, they had a green documentation. So, in order to move around in what is considered an Israeli area, that's what you needed to have. And every single person that is a Jerusalem resident or a 1948 resident or basically an Israeli resident, they would have that. But this didn't give us or give the Palestinians that have this documentation to be considered as citizens of that place, but it just considered them that they were temporary citizens until further notice. And certainly, because I wasn't capable of going back too many times, and certainly if for a Palestinian, if they would go against, they would consider that more like a visa. So if you were not renewing it as frequently as their laws would say, and in fact, if you don't stay living there for as long as they would consider is long enough, they would basically consider that as a reason to basically terminate your stay. And that's what happened. So my Hawiya was terminated simply because I was not living there any longer, even though my father, my mother, yeah, well, my great grandfathers, etc. Believe it or not, even my grandmother, okay, my grandmother, she was 70 some years old, and she had a Hawiya, and then due to an illness, she wasn't capable of going back to Palestine, to go back to Palestine and renew it. And she basically got her Hawiya terminated. In other words, she had no longer the right to live in Jerusalem or Al-Quds area, even though she was a resident there and was born there. We're talking about, when was she born? I think she was born in like 37 or something, so way before Israel even existed. But that was a good reason for them to basically terminate her stay. So just imagine Imagine that. We managed to get it back later on, but just an idea of how the Israeli system works in order to basically eliminate Palestinian presence. So when I say I had an Israeli document, it doesn't mean that I was approving the existence of Israel. That was just that stay, that visa, that, well, they consider it a visa, but that's basically the system. Um, so okay, let's continue. وَالَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا وَالَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا, those that were those that had أشركوا, the root is شَرَكَ. شَرَكَ actually means to be intertwined within something. So that's why we would call شراك النعل is basically the shoelace. You in order to for you to tie it, you would basically have to, I guess, wire it together, intertwine it, let those things in order to make a knot, etc. Okay, so ashraku, they would basically associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so those would be al-mushrikeen. But aren't they kuffar? Why did it say ashraku? So al-mushrikeen are kuffar. Okay, the mushrikeen. What's the difference between a mushrik and a kafir? So kafir is coming from the root kafara. Let's write that down. Okay, so the kafir is basically the root is kafara. Let's look at that. Right, لغة عربية is deep, man. لغة عربية is deep. Okay, so kafara in Arabic, basically in Arabic, basically means two things. It can mean al-juhud, which basically means to not have the gratitude, not recognize the gratitude for something. So in other words, juhud, where you're not recognizing when somebody offers you something good, somebody perhaps helps you in a way, etc., and you're just denying that they had any relationship or perhaps denying that you had given them any privilege. So that's kufr. That's a form of denying gratitude. That's juhud. The other kafara, the other meaning would be to deny. Okay, so there's one that is, I guess, more comprehensive, to deny, and there's another I guess, more specific one, which is to deny gratitude. Okay, so il-kuffar, uh, basically, we're denying the gratitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And il-kuffar, uh, can we be kafir as well? Yes, because if we're denying atheism, for example, we are kafarna bikum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically uses that term and says, you tell them, kafarna bikum, that we're kafir. In other words, we're kafir of what you call for, what you believe in. So yes, we are kafir of what they believe in. They are kafir of what we believe in. There's another meaning for kafara, which basically means to hide. So let's write those words down. So the first one was to deny gratitude. Let's do it that way. To deny gratitude, I'll just, maybe I could just make it smaller. Gratitude. Okay. The second one is to deny just in general, just giving you a general word to deny. And the third one is to hide. How did you get to hide? So to hide is basically um, to hide uh, anything. It could be that that's why the farmers are basically called kuffar. The farmers, they're called kuffar. Yes, the farmers are called kuffar. You would see in Surah Al-Fath, for example, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, يُعْجِبُ الزُّرَّاعَ لِيَغِيظَ بِهُمُ الْكُفَّارِ. Al-kuffar right there is not talking about disbelievers. Kuffar here are basically the farmers. How are they kuffar? They're kuffar because they hide the seeds. Really? So just by hiding the seeds, that's it? They're doomed to hellfire? No. They're called kuffar. They're called kuffar because a farmer also means kafir. Okay? But that doesn't mean that they are also kafir to go within this term. Okay? So if I were to call, so maybe we could Ye- I don't know how I got there. It's probably irrelevant, but let me say it there anyways. Let's say there's something, this is really irrelevant, but I had to say it. Okay. There's something called tawriya. Okay. What is tawriya? Well, tawriya is when you're using a word that basically is letting the person think of a certain meaning, but you're actually meaning a different meaning. Okay. So what does that mean? One word can have multiple meanings, but the other person understood one meaning, and you basically wanted to really um, wanted to use one particular meaning. So let's say, when can we use that? When you're under threat. So what does that mean? Well, tawriya, let's say you're, I'm just giving you an example. Let's say, just like that point when I was stopped at the Israeli bus station and with the guns pointed at your head and said, "Are you Muslim?" And you said no, that the person said that they are kafir. Okay. That they are kafir. And well, they just wanted to get away with it, but they didn't necessarily mean that they are kafir, meaning that they're not Muslim. They wanted to say that they are kafir. Uh, the other person understood that they were basically insinuating that they're not Muslim. But the person talking wanted to basically say, "Well, I'm kafir to tell you that I'm a farmer. So I didn't lie." All right. So did it lie? Okay. This is basically called tawriya. When is it permissible to use tawriya? In situations where a person's life is under threat. That's basically, or perhaps in situations you wanted to avoid danger, etc. Then in that situation, tawriya is manduhatun anil kadhib. It's an alternative to lying in situations like extreme situations like that. Okay. So why did I want to say to hide? So that person, for example, said, "Well, they are kafir." Why did I say they are kafir, not I am? There is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ had forbid, even if you wanted to act out a story, like the story, wanted to act it out, but I didn't say I am, even though I was actually, I guess, saying the story from a first person. But the Prophet ﷺ had prohibited or warned us, the least to say, from even when we would say a story where it involves that the person and speaking, let's say first person, and a person saying, "I am," let's say, kafir, or "I am Nasrani," or "I am Christian," or "I am Jew," that you would never say "I am," and you would say, "He said he is." You're doing a second person. He is, even though you are playing out, quote, the story, but you never want to, even when it comes to the person saying "I am" and a disbeliever, for example, you never want to say "I am such." That way it would never get wired into your brain that you would say such a thing whatsoever, that you would say, "He said he is, she said she is," and then you would never quote that, quote, "She said I am," and that that term. All right. Why? So it won't be whatsoever wired in your brain. And perhaps later on, when you are dying, that word, whether when you are dying or whether a certain time, and that it would be a word that probably would slip out of your mouth whatsoever, that you would never say, even if it's a quote. Never use it directly like that. All right. So, of course, kafara, these are the words for it. Let's go for something that is relevant, which is sharaka. And we're talking about shirk. Shirk, on the other hand, let's look into it. Shirk is, like I said, it basically is to mean intertwining something. And intertwining, am I spelling this right? No, I didn't spell it right. Okay. Let's see. Intertwining. Is it called intertwining? Nora, am I saying the English word wrong? Saying intertwining. Is that different than intertwine?
I think it's intertwined. Yeah.
Intertwine? Okay, thanks for teaching me. The other thing is basically to sharaka would can intertwine, and also sharaka would also mean to unite or add onto something. So add, unite something, that would also mean sharaka. So when you say a mushrik is a person that united or believed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was associated or intertwined, I guess, intertwined with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, this is shirk itself. So is every mushrik a kafir? Yes, every mushrik is a kafir, but not every kafir is a mushrik. Wait, why not? So let's just say a person that's an atheist. Is an atheist a kafir? Yes. Well, they denied Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala entirely. They denied the essence of God entirely. Okay. Well, that's a kafir. They denied Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But does that mean he united anything with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No. Because he doesn't even believe in God. Just on a side. Get you off that way you won't get bored. I had an uncle who was extremely simple, Allah yarhamu. And he owned, like many Palestinians, just owned a store. And this guy comes into the store, and um, my uncle wanted to do his simple method of da'wah. So he said, "Hey, Bob, guess what? Um, there's hell and there's heaven. And God, if you don't believe in him, he's going to put you in hell." And he said, "Don't worry, Z, I don't even believe in hell." He said, "That's why you're going to hell. So you got to believe in hell or you'll go to hell." And he said, "Listen, you're really offending me. That's a very offensive statement to say." He said, "I thought you don't believe in hell. Why are you offended now?" Allah yarhamu ya Rabbi. My uncle died of cancer, and he was a very simple person. He would put those speakers on his car reading Quran, and I said, "Uncle, why would you do that? The Quran is, those really loud speakers." That was in the early, well, no, it was more in I think mid 90s. And he said,
I used to do that after I became Muslim.
"Oh, great. No, that you were, I guess, like my uncle. You're related to my uncle, aren't you?" I was like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm doing da'wah. I'm letting them know there's a Quran. There was a word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." Like, okay. And he told me that he had several people actually approach the car and say, "We love that music." Um, and they were connected to it. And subhanAllah, I mean, even though, they called it music, well, they didn't know what it was. They thought it was music. Okay. وَلَتَجِدَنَّ أَقْرَبَهُمْ مَوَدَّةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. And you would say, لَتَجِدَنَّ, here the root is wajada. The word wajada, let me write that one. Wajada. Let's write that one. Wajada. Here we go. What is wajada? Wajada can mean to find. Wajada can mean to love. Wait, really? To love? Yes, to love. So when you say wajada, this isn't necessarily to find, this isn't related to love right here, and neither is this one, but just to let you know that you're seeking, you're loving, you're searching for something, etc. So just see that one, and just kind of relate to the verb. Okay, ولا تجدن, تجدن here, that lam and that noon together is basically making it as an oath. ولا تجدن أقربهم مودة. uh, you would find أقربهم, قرب is basically getting close. So أقربهم, this is a superlative verb. Okay, superlative verb, basically telling you that there is أقربهم, there's one that is near and the other that is nearer. So that was a superlative verb. أقربهم مودة. What is المودة? المودة is love. المودة is love. And المودة could also be affection. And the root is ودد. Okay? ودد. And when we're speaking about love, affection, In other words, some form of emotional feeling that it's not full of hate. But are we really seeing that today? I was, like I said, I was listening to Ellen Pepe yesterday, um, and he was talking about Zionism and how what actually formed the whole idea of not only Zionism, but the whole idea of giving the Jews a particular place to migrate to, and that is Palestine. He said that the idea was more formed by the Christians and not the Jews. That was really that was really astonishing to hear. Um, I mean, I know that that the Christians, basically, specifically evangelicals, Protestant, they basically believed in the Harmageddon, and that there's going to come a time where the Jews would be basically in Jerusalem, and then Jesus Christ would come back, and then the Jews would then believe in him and all of that. So that piece of it, we know that that during our times, I guess, but is it necessarily that is it necessarily founded? The idea, was it founded by the Christians? That one, I guess, was news to me. I always thought that that the Zionists, they basically started out the idea, and then later some of the Christians had related to it and found, I guess, something that they would click into. So that was, I guess, something new that I learned yesterday, at least from what Ellen Pepe in his history and his historian, I guess, background, was, I don't know if this is factual, but this is what he was basically saying. So at the end, we would have certainly certain Christians that would, in fact, be more Zionist than the Zionists themselves, believe it or not. Um, Having that being said, let's see. وَلَا تَجِدَنَّ أَقْرَبَهُمْ مَوَدَّةً. So where's the mawadda from those Christian Zionists? In fact, Israel would not exist without the support of all, without the support of all the American, specifically the evangelical support. Right now we have a lot of the Muslims confused whether they should vote for Kamala Harris or whether they should vote for Trump, thinking that Trump was going to be a better candidate. To be honest, I don't even know what my stance should be. So it's not. I'm not telling you to vote for Kamala.
There's always Jill Stein.
There's always Jill Stein, exactly. But I was listening to a podcast the other day with Jill Stein. She says that she recognizes that there's no way for her to win. It's just that she just wants to, I guess, put forward in out there and put forward and put it out there that there's always a voice that is refusing both parties and this type of a division, both parties, and that it's possible. Because last time she actually gave her votes, she gave her votes to Trump. And she says straightforward, she says, I know I'm not going to win, but I'm going to be later on perhaps considering giving my votes to Trump. So it's going to be the same again. So if you're voting Jill Stein, that actually means technically it's going for Trump. The situation is really complex. I'm not, it's really complex. But um, the situation, I guess it doesn't mean that I know the solution, but laying it out there is important for us to at least know what's going on, even if I don't have the solution for it. It's kind of like, yes, you know that there's cancer, but it doesn't mean that's the start. You know that there's a diagnosis, even though we know that we don't have a cure for cancer. Okay. So looking at the situation, the ones that are pro-Trump are generally evangelicals. Of course, evangelicals who are a lot more Zionist than the Zionists themselves, believe it or not. And you would see, what's it called? On the other hand, the ones that are pro Kamala Harris, pro Biden, Democrats, whatever, they're right now, at least some of them are showing, some of them are basically the liberals, the LGBT lobby, etc., feminist lobby is basically pro-Palestine. But at the same time, once they get into power, you just need to recognize that that they're not actually going to be as inclusive as they would like to use, because the word inclusive was, I guess, a temporary term that they wanted to present, that tolerance, that inclusivity, and all of that. That's really to be defined by them, that it includes. It is to consider inclusivity towards them, but not inclusivity towards whoever disagrees with them. So just keep that in mind. In other words, are we then going to be giving them more power to perhaps be a power that's going to later on be hard to attack, because they would basically be believe it or not, but worse than the Crusaders themselves. Just keep that in mind. So we're looking at a coin with two sides. One side is, holding a sword that they will use later, and the other is basically holding, I guess, a shield and a sword. So you're like, okay, which one? They're really going to be against us either way, both sides. So, this is the debate that Muslims are right now thinking that, let me get into that debate and see which one is better. But just put that within perspective, that we're right now just choosing, and we would think that uh, we're just choosing the lesser evil. And what is really the lesser evil? Is the lesser evil to choose our death right now, or is the lesser evil choosing our death later? How do we understand all of this? It's pretty complex, and it's Allah المستعان, the situation that we're living in. All right. لتجدن أقربهم مودة. المودة المودة is basically, like I said, can mean love. Well, this is wujd, but المودة could also mean love, can also mean affection, could also mean to show some form of emotions, and emotions to basically get the heart of someone. Okay. So this is أقربهم مودة. When was المودة used? المودة was also used between the husband and the wife. Okay, so that there's a mawadda right there. There's a form of affection. There's a mercy. Okay, so that's للذين آمنوا الذين قالوا إنا نصارى. Those that had said إنا نصارى. What is نصارى? Nasara actually is not Christian. Wait, I thought they were. Oh, well, yes, it is Christian, but it's not an accurate translation to Christian. Wait, explain this to me. Okay, so the word Nasara actually comes from the city Nazareth. Nazareth is basically in the northern part of Palestine. Let's see it on the map, please. Okay, and let's do it. Nazareth. Okay, let's see it on Palestine, on the map. Sorry, and I went to it. Beautiful place, very beautiful place. The Let's see, give me a map. Okay, here we go. Here's the map. You could see that it is in the northern part of Palestine, and that's why this area is mountainous. Very beautiful area. This one actually shows the mountainous area even better. A very mountainous area, and you're looking at the breeze that's coming. Why is it beautiful breeze? Well, it's beautiful breeze because I want you to just see right there. It's getting during the morning. Don't take my word for the exact thing, and was it during the morning or during the evening, but during the morning the breeze is coming this way. During the evening the breeze is coming this way. Or did I confuse it? No, during the evening the breeze is coming this way. That's why during the evening it would be cool breeze and bringing in some moisture. In the evening, in the morning, we would be getting a breeze that is hot and dry because it would be coming this way. Palestine is a very complex place. So that's why when you look at Nazareth, it's a mountainous area, and you're getting the breeze from this Mediterranean Sea hitting you this way, and this is right there. You could see, you could, and you know what? Maybe I could tell sister, what's her name? Umayya, sister Umayya. So this area is very similar in its um in its breeze, in its area, in, I guess, in the terrain, very similar to Lebanon. You could see that it actually is a continuation of it. You could see right there those mountains continuation until it goes all the way to Lebanon. So it's very similar to Lebanon in its terrain, in its breeze, all of it, very similar to Lebanon. I don't think there's any more beautiful place than Lebanon, to be honest. Jibal Lebanon, rightly said Fairuz, nothing like Jibal Lebanon. Okay. It's beautiful. It is beautiful. Okay. You know, I'll never forget Lebanon. Okay, let's continue right there. Forget about Lebanon. Okay. أقربهم مودة للذين آمنوا. Do I think Lebanon is more beautiful than Palestine? Yes, I do. I really think Lebanon in its terrain is a lot more beautiful than Palestine. So why would I consider Palestine in its terrain? There's a difference. Palestine is a very abused earth. So I'm talking about the terrain here. It's not a fertile place. Oh, forget about Haifa and Jaffa. That's a different story. But Jerusalem area, you could see that the earth itself, people had been living there for a long time, that it's not fertile. You can't use it to do crops and all of that. It's not a fertile place, and it's a holy place but not necessarily a fertile place. So the terrain, take an example, Mecca as well. Is the terrain there beautiful terrain? The answer is absolutely not. It's not green. It's a desert. It's the middle of scorching heat. It's Mubarak for the place and what it contains, as by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what He had said about it. But is it a beautiful terrain? The answer is no. Okay. So that doesn't mean that this is in any way or any shape speaking about Palestine as not being a holy place. Okay. Because neither is Mecca in its, I guess, terrain a beautiful place. It's not a beautiful place, but it's a holy place. It's a holy place, but it doesn't make it a beautiful terrain in the, let's say, the chosen place to being in its appearance the most beautiful place. Okay. لا تجدن أقربهم مودة للذين آمنوا الذين قالوا إنا نصارى. And we said Nasara goes back to Nazareth. Nazareth, that is the city. There are some different interpretations. Is it Nazareth? Is that why they were called Nasara, to really mean Nazareth? So why didn't you call them Christians? Because that would be Masihi. Masihi would be a person that is related to the Messiah, and that, or Christ. Okay, or Christ. So a Christian is basically related to Christ. He is Christ oriented, so he is Christian. So the Quran didn't call them Christians. The Quran called them Nazarethians. Can we do that? I don't know if it's in English, that's how you do it, but yeah. So basically, the Quran related them that they were oriented to Nazareth and not oriented to Christ. Okay. Why? Because Christ, according to Islam, which basically we did talk about that before, Christ does not mean that he's crucified. Christ means that it comes from the root masaha, or let's put the root right there, masaha, which basically comes from the Messiah, okay? And masaha, that he basically will over wipe or basically surround, basically complete the earth in peace. Okay, so he's a Messiah because he will surround, or at least surround the earth with peace. So that's al-Masih. That's the Messiah. Okay, so do the Muslims believe that Jesus be upon him is the Messiah? The answer is yes, of course. The ayah was really straightforward in calling him al-Masih, al-Masih ibn Maryam. All right, so yes, the Muslims believe in the Messiah. Muslims believe in Christ.
So it's not the anointed one?
Or well, that is a different interpretation. The anointed one to also mean Messiah, to mean the anointed one. But you would say majority of the scholars actually said مسح الأرض عدلا, عدلا and وسلاما. مسح الأرض عدلا, that he would basically bring justice to the world. Okay, so Masih from Masaha. Okay, masaha, that would be, and that's closer to the actual word. That masaha to mean that he would fill the earth with justice, in other words, with peace. Okay, when he comes back. Okay, so that's al-Masih alayhi salam. Okay, the Messiah, is it the anointed one as well? That's a different interpretation. That's also another interpretation that some scholars had, but you could see that the anointed one, or al-Mukhtar, al-Mustafa, okay, al-Mukhtar or al-Mustafa, that's what al-Masih really means. But you could see that al-Mukhtar, al-Mustafa is not necessarily coming from masaha. Masaha actually means to wipe. Okay, so he's wiping the earth with justice. Wiping the earth with justice. Wiping the earth with peace. That's al-Masih. Okay, so the Muslims would consider that Isa alayhi salam is the Messiah. He is the Christ because he is also the al-Masih, the one that is anointed, the one that is going to be wiping the earth with justice and peace. He is basically the prophet that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had chosen, that he would also come at the end of times. All right, let's continue. ذلك بأن منهم قسيسين ورهبانا. Let's go back to Tafseer al-Qurtubi and not necessarily just let's see. Well, this ayah, al-Qurtubi said هذه الآية نزلت في النجاشي وأصحابه. That this ayah was revealed in al-Najashi. Who's al-Najashi? Al-Najashi was actually, that was not his name. His name, well, the Arab would Arabize the name, but that doesn't, Askhama, but that isn't necessarily his name. Okay, the Arab would, they don't know how to say the foreign name, or at least the way that they would say it, perhaps in Amhari, or who knows what language he spoke. But the Arab would, I guess, put a Arabi coating on it, and it would come out as Askhama. But in Najashi was the position, the system, the monarchy system that they had basically made, and in Abyssinia, in Ethiopia. So the kingdom of Ethiopia at the time was, and until the time of today, by the way, Ethiopia was one of the only countries that was never colonized. It was throughout history a kingdom on its own. And Ethiopia at the time, basically you're looking at in Najashi, it was a system where the king was not a politician, but the priest was a politician. Okay, so the priest was the person that was the ruler. So he, then Najashi, was basically a priest and he was the one that was ruling, and the position of that king was called Najashi. All right, in English, it's Negus. Okay, but that wasn't his name. His name was not Najashi. Okay, and his friends. What happened? What is the story? Let's look at the story. When the Muslims basically were tortured in Mecca, the Muslims were, I guess, many of them, and keep in mind that the majority that were becoming Muslim weren't from the elite. The majority that was becoming Muslim was actually from the poor, the poor communities. They saw in Islam, I guess, justice. They saw in Islam the religion of the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They saw in it the truth, etc. And it was the poor, it was the slaves, like Zinnira, like Bilal ibn Rabah, like Ammar ibn Yasir. Ammar ibn Yasir, his mother Sumayya, was also uh, a slave herself. And there were many slaves that had become Muslim, and certainly in a tribal society, a person that is a slave becomes an easy target for those that want to attack, because they would guarantee that there's no one to support their backs. So the Muslims that usually, or let's say, because you had some that had a good tribe, just like Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, he was also going with them, even though he had a supporting tribe. But certainly, even a great tribe like the tribe of Bani Hashim, or like the tribe, of course, of many tribes, like Uthman bin Affan, even, they did have a tribe that was supposed to be supporting them, but because they were Muslim, they were basically ostracized, and they found themselves having no safety and certainly no support. So that's when they had come to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him, where else? How can we be? We want to practice our faith, but this is far than what we can handle. And even in the early times of Islam, it was forbidden upon them to engage in any form of retaliation, any form of war whatsoever. So they really had no choice and no ability to fight back. And even if they did have the ability to fight back, it wasn't a problem of legislating fighting back. If you were to fight back, that was going to give a justification to use more force against you, and perhaps that would bring about the total elimination of the Muslim presence, even in its early stages. So then the Muslims had migrated to Abyssinia, or to Ethiopia at the time, and the story is mentioned in Sirat ibn Ishaq, or Sirat ibn Ishaq later on. Of course, well, Ibn Hisham, Ibn Ishaq, one summarized the other. Okay, what happened? So they feared from the mushrikeen, they feared from, of course, the pagans that was basically controlling Mecca, and of course they were in large numbers. But then the Prophet ﷺ, when he had migrated to Medina, they were not capable of reaching Medina. What happened? The war, basically, there was a war, and that basically prevented the Muslims that were in Abyssinia to basically continue and go to Medina. And when the Battle of Badr happened, and it had, the word is Sanadid al-Kuffar. Sanadid al-Kuffar, kind of like the knights, kind of like the most ardent, and I guess the strongest kuffar, the most courageous kuffar, I guess. They basically said, well, we will just retaliate for, of course, because in the Battle of Badr, the Muslims had defeated the kuffar. So what they wanted to do, they couldn't fight back, and they couldn't face the Muslims in Medina. So they thought, well, what we could do we could go to the rest of the Muslims that are in Abyssinia, and somehow we would gift the king there. We would give him some gifts and basically we'll send two men, and these two men would convince the king to give us the Muslims that had fled to his land, and then we would just kill them, and that's going to retaliate, or at least give us the ability to, right there, whoever was killed in Badr will basically kill the Muslims that were in Abyssinia. We'll just go get those, kill them, and that way we would not feel defeated. That was their idea. Okay, let's see. So the Kuffar Quraysh, they basically sent Amr ibn al-As. Amr ibn al-As at the time was not Muslim, and Abdullah ibn Abi Rabi'a, and they took with them all these gifts. The Prophet ﷺ heard about the plot, so the Prophet ﷺ sent Amr ibn Umayyah al-Damri. We're going to talk about Amr ibn Umayyah al-Damri later. And so the Prophet ﷺ sends Amr ibn Umayyah al-Damri, and he sent a note to the king. So he comes to the king, and the king reads the Prophet ﷺ's note. The king reads the note that the Prophet ﷺ had written, not necessarily the Prophet ﷺ himself had written, but ordered someone else to write it. So just so that we won't get into the confusion, was he literate or illiterate? And then the king basically calls on to Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and I guess the Muhajirin, those that had migrated there. And then he also calls on to the priests and al-Qissisin, the monks there, joins them together. And it's like, hey, we really, it's kind of like a big meeting right there. And then ordered Ja'far ibn Abi Talib to read some of the Quran. So right there, he starts reading from Surah Maryam. And they then started going into tears from hearing the surah, and certainly hearing the surah and the translation. So this ayah was basically revealed, وَلَتَجِدَنَّ أَقْرَبَهُمْ مَوَدَّةَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّا نَصَارَى. You would find those that have the best affection or at least emotions towards the believers are those that had said inna nasara. And he, of course, this ayah was revealed so just so that we could see it. We know the story, or at least in the Message, the movie, it brings a really good, I must say that I think the Message movie was a very successful movie, to be honest. I think it really revived our the seerah within the Muslim community, at least at the time. Right now, the generation is so used to, I guess, this the colors and the more HD, I guess, photo and videos and all of that, that if they were to watch Risala or the
It's time
Risala,
for a remake.
exactly. I guess it's time for a remake, but I must admit it was actually a very, very successful video. Millions and millions of people had actually learned about Islam and its history just from the movie Ar-Risala. And it's worthy of note. And definitely, I do actually make a series, it's on YouTube, where it has gone wrong and what was actually, I guess, not accurate within a risala. So, but in the end, that it contains a lot of, I guess, good. And my favorite piece is when Ja'far ibn Abi Talib faces that king and reads for him Surah Maryam, and that was probably my favorite in Film Risala. Okay, let's continue right there. Okay, so some scholars actually said, let's see, here's one. Abu Dawood had narrated that الهجرة الأولى هجرة المسلمين إلى أرض الحبشة وساق الحديث بطوله. So I'll just mention that one. Hold on. So where is the story actually mentioned in? right? Let's see. So we got number one, السير والمغازي لابن إسحاق. So this is the reference right there. And تفسير الطبري. Oh, ironically, I didn't know that تفسير الطبري actually mentioned it as well. أسباب النزول للواحدي also mentions it. So أسباب النزول for الوحدي. أسباب النزول actually means the reason of revelation for الوحدي. This book is not too big. It's just one volume. It's not too big. But you could see a lot of the Qur'ans would actually have this annex to it. Okay, Tafsir al-Tabari is in almost maybe 15 volumes. Well, no, 10 volumes perhaps. Okay, let's say the story. If he said that ساق الحديث بطوله, let's see where else this is mentioned in. Ibn Abd al-Barr, who basically was a Maliki scholar, he said that it was not necessarily in Sunan Abi Dawood, and that is كما يوهم كلام المصنف. So he said, well, what so let's see. I want you to look at this one. This was quite interesting. So Al-Qurtubi said Abu Dawood, quote, had narrated this narration. Someone else, basically Ibn Abd al-Barr, who's also Maliki, just like Al-Qurtubi, okay, he basically said, well, right there, Ibn Abd al-Barr, he said, well, it is not actually it was not narrated by Abu Dawood, and therefore al-Musannif, that is Al-Qurtubi, had basically made a mistake right there. It's not in Sunan Abu Dawud. But let's say, is it elsewhere mentioned? Well, Ibn Abi Hatim, Al-Wahidi fi Asbab al-Nuzul, they basically did mention the story from another chain of narration. So in other words, so wait a minute, is the story authentic or not? That's what we want to get to. A lot of these stories, we don't necessarily have the same chain of narration that we would have for a hadith. Okay, just keep that one in mind. So these stories would be mentioned. Does that mean they're not true? No, that doesn't mean they're not true, but it just means that we don't have a chain of narration to speak about, let's say, I guess the level of authenticity. The classification is not the same. That's why you would see historians just like right there, اختصار المغازي والسير for or you'll see الواحدي في أسباب النزول. Well, sometimes, well, الواحدي is probably not included. Maybe that one, الواحدي, because he does actually mention a hadith and even their sanad. But you would see, for example, Sirat ibn Ishaq or Ibn Hisham, okay, they don't necessarily have the details for um, I guess for the stories that were mentioned. So a lot of the stories about Sirah, a lot about the stories that happened in, let's say, in the history of Islam, etc., we don't necessarily have a chain of narration, and that's why you would see a lot of those stories, not necessarily being talked about like they were completely authentic. There was another scholar that is worthy of mention, Akram Diya al-Umari, not Akram al-Nadawi, the Indian / British guy. No, Akram Diya al-Umari was, I believe, Iraqi. And what he wanted to do, he wanted to write something like Sahih al-Sirah. And what he did was gather, in his book, try to get to the chain of narration for the different stories within Sirah and see which one's authentic or not, and use the hadith, I guess, pedagogy, the hadith system, and the hadith, I guess, way, and basically judge Sirah that way. Although in the beginning of his book, which is almost 800 pages, in the beginning of his book, he wanted to use that methodology of hadith, but to be honest, I went over in fact, I translated the whole book. He didn't actually stay committed. So in the beginning, he was successful to a certain level, but then perhaps later on, I would say maybe he was successful maybe the first 200 pages, but later on, we're talking about an 800-page book. But later on, he could not whatsoever stay committed. Why couldn't he stay committed? Because we don't actually have the resources available whatsoever, because the chain of narration for a lot of the seerah, the history, was not necessarily mentioned with chains of narration. So it's impossible, basically, to use the hadith method and judge the different stories in seerah using the hadith method. It's going to be impossible. Why? Because we don't even have the chains of narrations all the time. Those were stories that were mentioned. I guess the historians, they documented what they had known, what they had done in research, but we don't have, I guess, the resource that slash this chain of narration for us to verify the accuracy of each and every single story in Sirah. Okay, there's a difference between Sirah and Hadith, okay? Because Hadith was anything that was mentioned upon the Prophet ﷺ, whether we're talking about words, quotes, actions, or whether we're speaking about descriptions of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, so that's Hadith. We've got a quote. We've got a quote right there, and there's a chain of narration that tells us this is the actual quote, this is what was said, this is what was done, etc. And here are the chains of narration, the chain of those that had whether basically traced the story to the Prophet ﷺ, and these are the persons, let's say that these are the figures that had narrated the story. But in Sirah, we don't actually have that. It was like Sirat ibn Hisham, he'll say the story, sometimes might put a chain of narration, sometimes might say one particular person that said the story, but we don't really know what methodology he used to verify that story. That doesn't mean that we would cancel out Sirah, but just wanted to let you know, I guess, how we understand these, these references and these footnotes. Let's see. Al-Bayhaqi had said 20 men came to the Prophet ﷺ while he was in Mecca, and perhaps a number close to that from the Christians. And when the Prophet ﷺ's information, the news started spreading from Abyssinia, they came and they found the Prophet ﷺ sitting in a certain area. They started talking to him, asking him questions, and a number of different people from Quraysh. They basically surrounded, and they were around the Kaaba. So once these 20 people, I guess, finished their, I guess, not interrogation, but more if it was asking, inquiring about some things to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ calls them, then invites them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reads Quran to them. And when they heard the ayat, that's when their eyes were filled with tears. Then they basically had believed in the Prophet ﷺ. They became Muslim, and they basically knew that he was the exact description of what was prophesied in their scripture. And when they basically got up, that's when Abu Jahl comes in, and with another group of people that were with him from Quraysh, and they said, and they started telling them, well, what a horrible group you are. You're a disgrace to your people and to the people of your faith. You would come to him and you would basically, instead of coming, in other words, spying on the man, you would basically believe in him, that is. So that's when, of course, that's when they basically started attacking them in that way. And that's, of course, they started telling them you're the stupidest groups that we had basically encountered. And that's when, of course, they said, well, peace be upon you. We're not going to right there, retaliate or respond to your own ignorant way of dealing with us. We've got our own actions that we'll be held accountable for, and you've got yours that you'll be held accountable for. We're not, in other words, going to start debating you or start going into any form of going low as your own speech. And that's when, of course, that's when that ayah was revealed. الذين آتيناهم الكتاب من قبله هم به يؤمنون. Those that had received the revelation before him, that is before the Prophet ﷺ, they would believe in the Prophet ﷺ. And then, of course, they basically, إلى قوله, all of that until the ayah, لا نبتغي الجاهلين, that we're not going to continue with the ignorance. And in Najashi, so yes, in Najashi did become Muslim, but you want to keep in mind, in Najashi that met the Muslims in the beginning is different than the Najashi that met the Muslims later. Okay, just keep that one in mind.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's, think of it as a different dynasty. Because you want to remember that they're both called Najashi because Najashi is not his name. Najashi is it's a political position. It's kind of like when you would say, there's a king, there's a Fir'aun. Fir'aun is not his name. Fir'aun is basically the monarchy system, the person that is the king, he was called the Fir'aun. So you had lots of pharaohs. It doesn't mean that that was their name. That was the system. The king was basically called this name, given this, I guess, this prestigious name, whatever it was called. Okay. So yes, in Najashi, the one that first invites or accepts them to be within the community is different than the other one. The later one, yes, there was one king, Najashi, that basically had become Muslim. In the Prophet ﷺ, we know for sure that the Prophet ﷺ even prayed Salat al-Ghaib. In fact, Salat al-Ghaib, or let's call it, what is Salat al-Ghaib? So it's the funeral prayer, but it's not the funeral prayer where you would have the deceased in person. It's a funeral prayer, but it's basically when the deceased or the actual funeral is not present. So it's, in other words, done by far. Okay. Okay. So there is I want you to look at this one. يقال. In اللغة العربية, يقال, it was said. You could see that it's giving me, it was said, it was mentioned, etc. Sometimes this is called for what is للتضعيف. What is للتضعيف? Meaning that the author himself is doubting the accuracy of such information, but he would still mention it. That it was that these ayat were revealed for a group of Christians from the city of Najran. So Najran, you're looking at, I guess, area bordering between Syria and Jordan, right there. So you're looking at Nasara Najran right there, and that some scholars said it was revealed for them. Okay, let's. I want to stop right there, inshallah, and we'll continue next class tomorrow and continue, inshallah, right there about the story. There's a lot to say, so we'll stop right here, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. All right, I guess everybody is like, we can have a peaceful Thursday, or to you, Wednesday. I could see, mashallah. Let's see, read the names. Got Nuda, Saida Rabia, long time no see, dear. We gotta really have a cup of coffee, right?
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Good to see you.
الحمد لله.
ربي يحفظك يا ربي.
I miss you.
I miss you, والله. I miss you.